When returning from Paṭipadā, people sometimes go and ask the bhikkhus for their bowls, to carry them back for them. But if they feel uncertain about the person who asks, whether he has ever had any experience in looking after a bowl, they will probably refuse politely, giving some reason or excuse for doing so. They will not readily hand their bowl to anyone until they had taught them how and where to put the bowl down, how to wash it clean and wipe it, and how to look after it generally until that person understands. Then he would be allowed to handle the bowl. How modern bhikkhus want to change the rules. Above is the customary way of looking after the bowl for those Kammaṭṭhāna monks who follow in line from Venerable Ajaan Mun. But the world goes the way of change, anicca. So nowadays it is uncertain whether the Dhamma and Vinaya may be altered or changed and made to go the way of anicca in some aspects or not. From what we have already seen, there is enough cause for concern in some of the external things which are, little by little, infiltrating into the sphere of those who practice the way. They are gradually increasing all the time, until they have almost reached the stage where those who practice the way properly and whose hearts are intent on Dhamma will have to move elsewhere, because they will not be able to stand it any longer, due to those things which are offensive in their sight and upsetting to their hearts, which they would otherwise have to put up with. The decorum of those who practice has already begun to change in the direction of things such as those which we have already mentioned, which is an indication of their nature, their fascination, and the peculiar excitement which they arouse in those monks and ourselves. We should have no difficulty in guessing what is the nature of these things, if we do not come to our senses and get back to our original principles, which are the Dhamma, the Vinaya, and all the Thutanga observances which act like protective armor that the teachers and acharyas have brought to us. There is reason to fear that we may become Thutanga Kammaṭṭhāna bhikkhus of the space age, who move so fast nobody can keep up with them because their speed is so much faster than those who have brought them up. This is not meant to be a criticism of those bhikkhus who practice well and properly, but it is said with real concern for the Dhamma, Vinaya, and Thutanga observances which are done by those of us bhikkhus who like to change things to suit their fancy, for this sort of thing will draw them down into the market of self-indulgence. For in this age there are easy, facile ways of learning, and we Thutanga bhikkhus may want to go fast, and we may learn and practice in ways that are quick and expedient, and which are far more expedient than the ways of the great teacher, or our own teachers who have brought us up in the ways of practice. Such expediency is like expecting us to get results from doing little or nothing. In the end, it just leads to hopelessness and delusion. So this lesson in Dhamma is presented in the hope that it will help all of us Thutanga bhikkhus to examine all those things in which the heart is indulgent, and which are at present creeping in and hiding in the quiet corners of our monasteries, huts, and robes, and in the hope that by showing them up they will become separated from us, driven out and kept at bay. Then they will never have an opportunity to get together, gain strength, and break up our circle of Kammaṭṭhāna, causing its destruction much sooner than would happen naturally. However, if we who practice the way are engrossed in external things much more than inwardly within ourselves, by making a comparison between ourselves and the principles of Dhamma and Vinaya, it is bound to lead to self-forgetfulness, so that the way is open for all sorts of bad, evil, and vicious things to creep in and establish a much more disorderly sanctuary than was there before, thereby setting up a self within us which is much more obstinate than the one which was originally there, which used to have Dhamma in its heart. Then this new self sets about burying the Dhamma completely until nothing at all can be seen of what used to be there. What used to be Dhamma changes and becomes the ways of the world. What used to be a clever person changes into a stupid person. What used to be a person with mindfulness becomes intoxicated. One who used to be in full control and command of himself becomes a servant with an inferior status, and these changes take place in one and the same person due to the influence of emotional feeling and thought. The body and speech, which used to be the instruments for doing good, change and become instruments of self-destruction, leading to complete and utter ruin, leaving no part, nothing, which could be developed to bring him back and change him into a worthy and consistent person again. This is what happens if the heart changes its state, for then thought and understanding also become different. Therefore, Those who practice the way should prepare themselves to receive their supreme inheritance to the utmost of their ability in their way of practice. Even if they face the loss of their lives, they must not give up those ways in which they have been accustomed to acting as a warrior. And when they actually reach the end of their lives, because they have been fighting all kinds of kilesas with ascetic practices that are forceful and patient in the face of difficulties, their expectation is that they will reach their end in that last minute, still fighting in the midst of the battle. The bodies of those who die in this war against the kilesas will not be stinking, rotten, loathsome corpses which frighten people, but they will be fragrant, with a fragrance that diffuses abroad, reaching all the directions, as well as above and below, and they will become a center of attraction, drawing the hearts of all people, Devatas, Indra, and Brahmas, making them feel a satisfaction which causes them to smile joyfully with pleasure, and arouses a desire in them to want to meet, see, and pay homage to them, and to worship their remains as the highest ideal to be constantly recalled and never forgotten. In the same way as the Lord Buddha and all the Savakas and Acharyas who reached Nibbana are the highest ideals which we uphold and bring to mind with homage and veneration, their relics, bones, and ashes are never looked upon as objects of loathing, disgust, or fear, but instead, people have the hope and strong faith that such relics or bone remains may come into their possession, so that they may pay homage to them and hold them in the highest veneration, and to bring them to mind every morning and evening, and at all other times, whatever they may be doing. They do this that they may receive well-being and blessings on themselves, their environment, and their homes, and also for security, to avoid all dangers that may threaten their lives and bodies. For these are things of value which are held in the highest regard, and cherished in all three realms of the universe. Therefore, the life and self-nature of those who practice the way should be full of courage and ability in fighting against and chopping down all the various kinds of obstacles, which their kilesa natures build up as thick, strong barriers against them until they manage to break through them. I implore all of you to be like this, even as that bhikkhu who is our great Acharya, who went along this path and gained victory and came back to the world. He gained freedom. The sasana then followed, arising and becoming prominent. The world then followed and flourished, because the hearts of good people were imbued with Dhamma, and they waited for an opportunity to give reverence and pay homage. There are still many people like this, who become attached to and dependent on those bhikkhus who lead the way with courage, and who act rightly and properly as leaders with ease and elegant skillfulness. The world still has a great hunger for virtue and for truly good people, a hunger which is almost insatiable. But although they may not be able to change their own ways to create an aura of virtue in their minds and bodies, to be a refuge for their hearts, they still want to see those who practice the way, and who are worthy of respect and faith, worthy of getting close to and intimate with their Dhamma. They want to pay respect to them, to venerate them, to look up to them as their ideal without getting satiated. For in spite of the fact that the world is in a state of confusion and turmoil, whirling about in the evil ways of mankind as it has been for such a long time that people have almost given up hope of being able to search for a way out, yet hope still arises whenever they see anything that seems worth picking up, and they want to pick it up. They see that it is worth grasping, so they want to grasp it. They see that it is worth depending on, so they want to depend on it, without ever getting bored or satiated with it, because the experience of happiness is the same everywhere throughout the world. Therefore, the practice which is for the sake of one's own heart, leading in the right way, Paṭipadā, is also right for the hearts of all those in the world who follow in the future. In this, the Lord Buddha went the way before us. At that time, when the Lord trained and disciplined himself, he was never anxious or concerned with thoughts in his heart as to who he was doing this for. He even made the effort to let go of the princess, his wife, who was like his own heart to him, together with all such things at that time, and he put all his strength and effort into correcting himself alone. After he had got rid of all anxiety, worry, darkness, and obscurity, he reflected and thought back to those things which he had aspired to in the past, and then he set out to do the duty of the great teacher, to spread and teach Dhamma to the world. Then all the Savakas walked the same way along the same path which the great teacher had prepared for them. In other words, they were interested in applying the teaching to themselves before giving it to others, until such time as they had attained the goal properly, after which they gradually began teaching their companions and others. In this way they followed the Lord, avoiding pitfalls and dangers. Any bhikkhu who walks the path, following the well-established examples of the Lord Buddha and the Sāvakas, is bound to become a living example of the Dhamma inheritance which was bestowed on him. There is no doubt about this. Those who practice the way should therefore take a pride in this joyful Sugato way. While discussing the changes in the ways of practice which are tending to diverge from the traditional teachings and to go in the wrong direction, it made me think of the forceful and fiery teaching delivered by Venerable Ajaan Mun due to something which shocked him while he was staying at Wat Nong Bao in Sakon Nakhon. This took place one evening after the Wat had been swept and cleaned up and after the bhikkhus had washed themselves. A number of bhikkhus had gathered at Venerable Ajaan's hut where he was talking to them about various aspects of Dhamma. On that day his talk turned to the subject of Venerable Ajaan Sao, and he said, "Venerable Ajaan Sao was a teacher who had great metta for the world as a basic characteristic of his heart. It was far stronger in him than in any of the other acharyas. In fact, he was quite outstanding in this respect, and anyone who had close contact with him was bound to admire and adore him straight away. But as for his teaching to the bhikkhus, novices, and lay people, it was never outstanding or remarkable, and it did not have a wide scope and depth like some other acharyas. He would speak a few sentences and then stop, after which he would sit straight upright, silent, imperturbable, and unconcerned, like an image of the Buddha, a Buddharupa, without moving a muscle. But what he taught stuck in the hearts of people and those bhikkhus of the kind who listened and understood, without ever being satiated or bored by it. Having left, they still felt that they wanted to see and hear him speak, and they never got tired of it. Everybody spoke in the same way about Venerable Ajaan Sao, saying how they loved him and they had so much faith in him. But the pity of it is that none of the bhikkhus and samarneras who were his followers tended to be resolute, nor did they have any firmly established idea of the way to go, either internally or externally, such as should be appropriate to those who had an acharya of such excellence to teach and train them. This was probably because they tended to be too self-forgetful, lackadaisical, proud, and conceited in their self-estimation, although they had nothing much to be conceited or complacent about. For they saw that their Ajaan was kind and tolerant to them with metta, never scolding them nor pointing out their faults immediately and harassing them like all the other acharyas did. And this was so, even when they did wrong and faulty things right in front of him, things for which they should have been told off and corrected, at least enough to make the wrongdoers have some mindfulness to watch out and to be careful of themselves in the future. Then they would not forget themselves in such a gross way until they became accustomed to it, and they would be people whose hearts displayed some admirable characteristics. Venerable Ajaan Mun stopped for a moment, and one of the bhikkhus took the opportunity to ask a rather impudent question which was completely lacking in skill and appropriateness, and the kind of thing which could have come from myself, for I have such tendencies in me right up to the present. He asked, "Is it true that Venerable Ajaan Sao had gained freedom from the kilesas and asavas, as everyone says and believes?" Our acharya, who had always been concerned to try and train his bhikkhus and samarneras to be clever and sharp-witted, when he heard this question, which was of such a kind as none of them should have been bold and forward enough to ask, just grinned and remained quiet for a while. Then he stared straight at this silly bhikkhu, whose intention had been pure and good, and he had sympathy, compassion, and understanding for him in his silliness and stupidity, which it was no use to blame or punish. He started to speak quite gently in the same kind of foolish way as the questioner, so as to acknowledge the foolishness and silliness of that bhikkhu, in the same way as a trained horse responds to the old woman who looks after it. So he said, "He reached the goal of freedom, Vimutti and Nibbana, long ago, since before you were born. What other silly delusions and doubts are you going to ask about? For the way you have learnt to ask questions is most unskillful, and lacking in any sort of tact which would indicate that this is a person who has some mindfulness and wisdom in him, with which he can cure his kilesas and stupidity to some extent. In such a case as this, the chitta lies contented to be buried in stupidity all the time. In doing meditation practice, the bhavana, stupidity and drowsy nodding sit like a weight pressing down on his head and never showing any signs of improvement, but just swaying back and forth like a monkey swaying about when watching a person. People who are stupid or clever display their characteristics outwardly, quite clearly enough for others to discern, and you, in particular, would seem to be so stupid as to be pathetic. While listening to any teaching, the Dhamma is not likely to be able to penetrate down to your heart, and those who teach you will soon get tired of it, if they have any wisdom in them. That is, apart from those acharyas who like to speak out because they have been ordained a long time, and they may not even be able to know what their own situation is. After this, Venerable Ajaan went on teaching that bhikkhu with consideration and compassion for him. But it was almost as if that bhikkhu had asked him this stupid question with the clever underlying purpose of inviting him to teach them Dhamma. The gist of the Dhamma which he taught at that time was not fiery and strong as it had been in the past, but full of consideration and metta, and his mode of delivery was so tender, gentle, impressive, and catching of heart in a way that cannot be equaled. As parents may teach their small child with love and compassion until they manage to get their child to see its faults with a soft heart and tears. I can only recall a little of the gist of the Dhamma which he then taught, so I ask your forgiveness for any faults or failings which will be due to my own delusions. What he said was something like this. Every day that passes by, it seems to me that my companions in Dhamma, instead of getting more and more clever by following the methods of Dhamma which I have taught, are in fact getting readily more stupid. But I am getting older every day, and the help I can give to you is getting less and less. And as time goes on, I am getting more and more decrepit, weary, and tired. The parts of this body are steadily degenerating, and it seems that it just manages to keep on breathing from day to day. Various kinds of food, which always used to strengthen the body, have now become enemies to the body, and I no longer have any desire to eat anything. In fact, it has turned and become a tiresome habit, almost as if it was glad all the time to take just those things which are medicines. The time when I shall die creeps nearer bit by bit, without ever stopping or resting to give some relief to the body and its parts at all. My breath, which used to flow in and out easily and automatically, now gets rougher and more difficult all the time, as if it is about to leave me altogether any time it can. But when I look at the results of my teaching, which should be apparent in accordance with the intention I have had in training and teaching my companions, what do I see but things that I never thought I should see? Some of them are so lazy, weak, and irresolute. Some are so dull, torpid, and lacking in any brightness and enthusiasm in doing the practice of Dhamma. Some of them turn and practice things which differ from the basic principles which I have taught them. Some of them display nothing but stupidity, and are almost incapable of reasoned thought, such as asking that question about Venerable Ajaan a short while ago, which is not the way of those who come to learn and train to attain freedom from dukkha by following the way along which the great teacher, the Sāsada, led us to go, because this was stupidity of a kind that was too obnoxious to hear and put up with. So it made me very concerned for my companions and followers that when I die there may be nobody who has both the basic principles in his heart and who puts into practice those methods which will ensure their continuity in the future for posterity. I am afraid it will be as I have said above, so I make haste to implore my companions who have come together here to learn and train, to do so with urgency in your hearts, for this present situation is not one that can remain stable and last long, in which we can afford to be complacent. As time goes by, the lives of each one of us is also going by in the same way, and those who are heedless and careless will have nothing much of value to take away with them. As the time passes by in this way, the thing which is bound to remain with oneself in an inseparable way is the state of unreliability and triviality which has always been firmly rooted in one's original traits of character. And the result that comes from heedlessness is that of being trapped in the endless and limitless accumulation of dukkha. Then, wherever one goes or stays, Mara will be waiting to harass one and cause disturbance, leading to dukkha and trouble in all sorts of ways, so that nowhere and never can one let go of it. All the time and everywhere, the careless, negligent person has dukkha bound tightly to himself and more tenaciously than his own shadow. This is because of his baneful fault of establishing himself as his own Mara by his failure to realize that carelessness and negligence is harmful, and that it is also Mara, just waiting to destroy and ruin himself. As for one who is not negligent and careless, he will tend to get what is good and beneficial to adorn him and to raise him up. The result of this will be well-being in the world and contentment in his heart all the time and everywhere, and freedom from dangers and misfortune, accidents and bad luck coming to disturb and torment him. In fact, all the results that come to one from not being negligent will be blessings and advantages without exception. I have tried as far as I can to teach all of you in all sorts of different ways and methods to make yourselves become your own best friends by not being negligent or careless in the work and duties of those who have gone forth and who practice the way, because I know all the time that before long this body of mine will depart from all of you, as they normally understand it in the conventions of this world. But while I am still alive, I can still teach and try to select whatever Dhamma is appropriate to the basic level and disposition of those who have been ordained, to teach with the utmost of my ability without hiding or holding back any part of it at all. Therefore, when I see or hear things which are bad amongst those who have come here to practice the way, such as heedlessness and carelessness, it goes against the aim which I have in mind for all my followers, which is close to my heart. I don't want to see or hear these things, and I don't want any of you to have any interest in doing them, because you will get a name for being careless and heedless, and wherever you are careless and heedless, it spoils you every time. So you should pay no attention to these bad things at all. I ask all of you please to be considerate to the one who trains and teaches you, who has set himself to do this task with everything he has got in the way of ability, with willingness and metta. Please try your best to train and discipline yourselves with the principles of Dhamma as I have taught them to you repeatedly all the time. Don't be like the ladles or spoons in the stew pot that know nothing of the taste of the stew at all. Instead, you should be like the tongue that knows all the various tastes of the food which comes to it, knowing what they are immediately. I am always anxious to find out how much of the various kinds of Dhamma which I have been teaching you frequently have penetrated into your hearts each time I give a talk, both in the sphere of practice, the various kinds of understanding which arise from the sphere of practice, and the knowledge which arises and is absorbed while listening to a Dhamma talk. This is a special kind of practice in which the talk that one is listening to arouses understanding that accords with what is being said, and the insight that one gains accords with whatever the teacher is explaining, following in step behind the teacher the whole time. When this happens, nothing of the talk is lost, and one's mind is free from any distraction which would otherwise break it up and spoil the causes which bring about those insights, making them very much more difficult to arouse. And the reason for this is the creation of obstacles which also obstruct the results. Therefore, in order to get results smoothly and steadily as one wants them, please do those things which cause these results with complete commitment. The results will then arise of themselves without any need to try and force them, as one must with the causes. Here, Venerable Ajaan finished his Dhamma talk, which was aimed at helping that bhikkhu whom he felt sorry for. At this point, I feel that I should go on to tell you about what happened after this talk, For the reasonings and the principles of Dhamma which Venerable Ajaan displayed then may act as a moral that we Buddhists can ponder and keep in mind. If I don't put it down here, the strength and weight of the Dhamma which Venerable Ajaan displayed then will be lost, for the subject of this Dhamma concerns that which brings sorrow and regret to those who revere the Sasana, Dhamma, and the Acharyas.